Welcome to Conversations with CSG, the global talent podcast from CSG Talent. We interview influential figures across a wide range of innovative and impactful industry sectors worldwide, discussing career journeys, overcoming challenge, achieving success, diversity, and much more. I'm sure you'll see value in a lot of the topics we cover. So here it is. Hope you enjoy.
Welcome to Conversations with CSG. Today we're joined by Grant Adams. Grant, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
We've known each other for a long time, mate, so we can jump straight into it. I just wanted to kind of start with a little bit about your background, your career. You're one of probably the best guys out there in terms of having dealer experience and OEM experience, and obviously building up a fantastic distribution network, dealer network for Komatsu, then going to Ascendum, the world's largest Volvo dealer. Obviously what you've built up over there for North America. What would be really useful for me as a starting point is really talking through how you sort of built Komatsu, talking through some of the major things you did from a strategic standpoint, and kind of delve into it from there.
Yeah, I don't know when it comes to building something. What we really built, the first thing was Komatsu Southwest, and really what we did there was we just focused on a strategy of how do we get enough buzz and interest in the business, and then how do we build the support up for that level of hype and buzz. And so just piece by piece, making sure we didn't outkick our coverage, that we came into the market. The first thing we focused on is obviously service. Uptime is the most critical thing to a customer. So if you can figure out how to keep their machines up and productive, that'll spur the rest of the growth. And then we aggressively targeted rental and sales, and then just started building the layers of product support, really put some metrics in around how many machines that we were servicing that weren't from our OEM. So we focused very heavily on trying to have the shop, 50% full of Caterpillar and John Deere and Volvo machines, as well as a multitude of other brands, because we really believe that if we led with service first, that we would then get the opportunity to sell somebody a machine or rent them a machine. Kind of that idea that each one of these transactions with a customer leads to more transactions. So really being focused on how do we grow the number of transactions with a customer, because that generates the stickiness that you need to grow. And then after Komatsu Southwest, when it became the merger with Komatsu Equipment and Komatsu Northeast, and we had all 34 of these branches together, really focusing on just those were great employees, just really focusing on how do we get the synergy, how do we get the cost structures right. That was a little bit of a different type scenario. One was how do we grow our way into profitability and grow our way into market share? And the other was we've inherited something with some market share, but now how do we make sure that it's profitable market share, not just chasing market share for market share? So really aligning somewhat in a similar strategy to the Southwest. Customers, regardless of state lines, they really do business regionally, and each region has a way of doing business that's different than other regions. I mean, 90% of it's the same, but when you look customers, I always think of Philly and South Jersey, for example. Philly and Southern Jersey, those customers cross that state line more than necessarily some of the Southern Jersey customers going up to Northern Jersey. And so really working at, okay, well, there's this Philly metro area that includes South Jersey, and customers do business there the same way. Very similar to here at Ascendum, customers in Georgia, they tend to, when they're on the edges of South Carolina, they'll do some business back and forth. Some of the South Carolina guys go into Georgia, some of the Georgia guys go into South Carolina. So you get this blurring of what does a region really look like, and then how do you let each region operate in such a manner that allows them to do business the way the customers there like to do business. And so I think that was really the main focus, is focus on the customer, focus how to get them up and running, and focus doing business in a way that they value and matches their business segment cycle.
What's really interesting to me is you're one of the best people that I've spoken to in terms of how do you get that operational leadership to differ in each region? Because like you just said, every region operates differently. Every customer wants something different, from the Southwest to the West Coast to the Northeast to the Northwest. How did you manage to get an operational structure where you had all these different regions operating in the ways that maximize revenue from each region? How did you get your operational team to sort of still work together and have an overarching strategy, but also have each region operating almost not independently, but to the needs of their customers?
Yeah. So I think 90% of the business is the same. It's still selling a widget, taking care of that widget and making sure the customer has uptime, productivity. The nuances of how deal structure is done is primarily what changes, because you have difference in seasons, you have difference in ground conditions, you have differences maybe in the way they bid, maybe in their balance sheet requirements. The further west you go, the more likely customers are to purchase their way into a machine, where on the East Coast, they're prone to buy a machine for a set length of time for a contract. So I think the way that we worked on getting the group to align, but also to work in a way that benefited the region and those type of customers, is we did a tremendous amount. Hats off to Amy Parrish. I don't know if you know Amy Parrish. She's a great executive coach out there. She's done work with me. Golly, we're going on 12 years now. But we spent a lot of time working on developing structures around when this scenario happens, mainly teaching how can we still obtain the same objectives, but we do it in such a manner that they understand what's expected of them and the type of operating discipline that we expect. So we spent a lot of time around scenarios. Okay, this is a scenario that happens. How would you handle it? And I think the biggest benefit that came from that actually is that it put tools in each region's playbook that they could then execute. Just because the way customers in Philly and South Jersey do business is different than the way the customers in, say, Utah or Nevada do business, that doesn't mean that you can't know that idea, that this is a way that someone structures it. And all of a sudden having that structure available to you in the West on the rare occasion you need it, is an advantage. So it really was like taking a lot of mini playbooks. If we use a football analogy, it was like taking something where American football, where you have maybe 10 offensive plays in your playbook. All of a sudden, with these 9 regions you got 90 plays. And so there was the 10 or so you were really good at executing, but you knew you could pull one of these other plays out, and you had that other person to bounce ideas off of. I've got a customer that's bidding a job that looks like this. This is what he's asking me. How are you doing it? How would you guys handle that one? And so without giving away too many secrets in this, it became a way for someone else to go, okay, with customer ABC in New York City, we did it this way. I could bring that idea to Utah and see if it works in this customer scenario.
So you would always have the leadership group really close. So if something worked really well in Georgia or New York or California, you would say, have you guys tried doing this in your region? This might be a good idea. So you're always sharing ideas.
Yeah. And one of the things that worked really well, and I've been doing this now for about 20 years, is there's a meeting and organizational structure. I spent some time really looking at how much time should each employee be spending in meetings, right? Because meetings can be a giant waste of time, but there's also a part of having some meetings where it's important for communication to flow through the entire organization. And so in that scenario, when you had 34 branches, I put a lot of time into thinking through exactly, how down to, a parts counter guy needs about 30 minutes of communication a week to understand what's going on in the company. But the higher the level of the employee, there was a little bit more time that was required. So at my level, my Mondays from 5:30 in the morning till about 7:30 at night were just pure meetings. But the great part for me was after that, I could go spend the rest of my time with customers. And so by creating this cadence, and it almost blocked a lot of new meetings from forming. And we had groups when we first came in that we had some employees at very low levels that were in 6 hours of meetings a week, which is absolute overkill. We got that down to 30 minutes, and they felt like they were getting better communication than they were getting in the 6 hours. But at the same time, I would say our top level leaders were in meetings for about 4 hours a week. And usually we just knock them all out on Monday. And that allowed the right amount of time for the group to build trust and to have some vulnerability with everybody, to have tough conversations, as well as learning moments. And so we spent a lot of time working on our communication structure.
It's really interesting because one of the things working in this market that we find a lot is a lot of dealers will spend a whole 5 days or 3 days in meetings constantly, sometimes about things that are really important, sometimes about things that could be solved with a conversation. It's really interesting because I know for a fact that you've raised a lot of really strong leaders and you've coached a lot of really strong leaders and helped a lot of people's careers. What do you think's the most important thing that you've done personally, coaching those people that are doing these executive level roles to make them understand how much they need to be on the shop floor, how much they need to be dealing with customers, and kind of removing them from the comfort blanket of sitting in a meeting room all the time, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I think one thing is just being vulnerable with employees. I think that's a big, and I don't mean vulnerability for vulnerability's sake, but I think there's a part of this where you just have to be honest with people and tell them, yeah, right now, I don't have the answer to that one. I'm working on finishing gathering the information, but be a little bit patient with me and we'll get there. I think there's a piece of it that comes down to just communicating again and again, what's the most important thing that anyone could be working on. We even went to the point where we had dashboards for every employee where they knew exactly what they needed to focus on every day. So on the parts counter, it was, hey, what did I quote yesterday? What's still outstanding? Where are we at for the month on our numbers? For a service technician, it's what's my productivity? What's my billable rate? What percentage of my time is actually being invoiced? And it's amazing, when you give employees access to data and you can produce it for them in a way that's easy to understand, employees immediately, in my experience, respond to that. And they begin to take actions that will surprise you, that really help the company perform better. And so then when you are walking around a shop floor and you're going to ask employees, hey, I'm coming to this branch today. Could all of you come up with 3 things you think we could be doing better? Bring me some good ideas of what we could be doing better. What would make your life easier? What would make you more productive? And the number of great insights that came from employees where they just said, hey, if we had this style oil pump, it would save us 10 minutes per job. And you start talking about how many work orders are going on, you can really start to get a lot of value out of, okay, well, this $1,600 little oil pump can make a huge difference. And now I need to buy, 50 of them. But if I buy 50 of these oil pumps, here's the return on investment. In 9 months, this is more than paid for itself. And so just things like that, where I think giving employees the opportunity to speak to what could be better in a constructive way, instead of just the complaining and something off to the side being said behind closed doors. When you really give people a chance to say, hey, bring me an idea. If it's good, we'll implement it. I've been really surprised when you give people data, the good feedback they give. And so I think all that went back to your initial, how does it work with mentorship? I think it's the exact same thing. It's just, there's a lot of things you have to do where you just spend time with people and you just ask them, hey, what do you need from me to do your job better? What do you need to know about the way I think? And I think that's where someone like Amy just did a great job helping pull out things that were in my mind that I didn't do a good job communicating. And often the employees got to see it. They got to see what she would say, Grant, that one's on you. You didn't communicate that well. Okay, I'll take that feedback and do better at that one. So I think those are the kind of things that just help, that honesty and trust and vulnerability help build good leaders.
100%. And I think honesty, transparency, but also you mentioned it really there as well. I think it's a really key point is you have to allow people to make mistakes. And if you make a mistake yourself, there's nothing wrong with owning up to it. And that creates respect from a team, and that creates a really positive culture, because you've done the same thing at Ascendum that you did at Komatsu, which is you've said a great few sayings to me in the past, but one of them is sometimes some people have got to swallow some water.
Yeah.
And if you do, then it's like you learn from your mistakes. You create a culture of, right, we've made a mistake there, we won't make it again. But a really key thing you've said there is because you're listening to every level of employee, you're realizing that this little change from an oil pump perspective probably saved quite a lot of money. One question that I would have for all the dealers watching this is, how did you create that forum for these people to raise these ideas, and how did these ideas get to your desk? Because I think that's something that a lot of dealers struggle with, because they might have the wrong person in charge of the shop. They might have the wrong person running service. How do you create this really positive forum where these small ideas that can make a big difference can come to you specifically?
Well, one, I think that weekly meeting cadence. I mean, I just came in here from having our weekly roundup with all of our directors and GMs. One of the big things we talk about in that meeting, we start all of our meetings with a safety share, but after we have a safety share, because that's the most important thing we're here to do, is make sure everybody's safe. The next step of that is, okay, how's everybody doing? Let's check in. Let's see what's going on in your life personally, anything we all need to know, and then kind of jump right into, hey, what are the victories and fires from the week? What were the biggest achievements you had in the last 5 days, and what fires do you have? Because I view kind of the Monday morning meeting schedule as, now it's just a morning, but I view the Monday morning meeting schedule as kind of, it's confessional time. What are you swallowing salt water on you need to tell everybody about, or what's a fire that is coming? Because there's a lot of horsepower in the room that if there's a fire you're experiencing, we can probably get it mitigated pretty quick if it surfaces quick, the faster it surfaces.
I love that. So you're allowing people to put their mistakes on the table essentially and say, look, Grant, I might have messed up here, but that means you can solve it for them. Because I think one of the major problems that sometimes happens in dealerships and in OEMs as well is somebody makes a mistake, nobody hears about it, and a small mistake gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and in some cases results in legal cases, sometimes results in revenue being lost or a mistake on orders. It seems like that sort of approach sort of is quite disarming for people as well, because they feel like they can come to these meetings with a mistake and then just say, look, you made a mistake, let's solve it, which is really, really positive.
Yeah, and I think to me, the biggest mistake usually comes in not surfacing the issue. And I would say 90% of the times I'm not even the one that has to solve it. Usually it's
Yeah.
other people around that are solving it. It's like this, it's just like data. The second it's exposed and revealed, people jump into action. And so I think that's a critical piece to this, is how do you get the data out? And as soon as it gets out, everybody knows what to do. And then the other thing that happens with these events, I mean, there's some things that are mistakes where you're like, hey, that was a mistake you made, or that's a mistake I made. But there's a lot of times where there's some, like, I call them high value learning incidents. I think that's a military term. There's some high value learning incidents that just come with experience, where you just say, hey, I've been there. I've done this one before. It cost me this. Here's the story behind it. This is why I wouldn't do it. And a lot of times that's very helpful for people.
No, 100%. And obviously being involved with this for such a long time, I think one of the things is the market's changed a lot. What do you think have been some of the sort of mental changes that you've seen in the market, and some of the challenges as well? Because obviously it is a challenging market right now for OEMs and dealers. Talk to me about some of the fundamental changes you've seen.
Well, I think one of the key things to know first is, as we jump into the key fundamental changes that are going on, is in an OEM's world, an OEM reacting too quickly to things actually can be very expensive if you think about it. So if they design a machine too fast, if they come up with a fix too fast for things, it creates all kinds of downstream problems, because they're trying to make 1,000 widgets the same way every time. So if they don't do that well, then they have giant recalls and campaigns, very expensive things in the field. In the dealer world, it's the opposite. The longer the problem exists, the more expensive it gets. So the longer that fire is out there, and that's really where a dealer provides value, is that we have to operate as a dealer in a way the customers demand a speed that the dealer can react to, that is actually not good sometimes for the OEM to move in that manner, because again, they're creating 1,000 widgets at a time. And if they react really quickly, they can create all kinds of downstream problems. I think in that sense, that's where you get a lot of this back and forth with how do you take care of the customer well. So I think that's an important piece to understand. And then what's going on in the market right now, we have several things, and they impact both sides of this. One side is that the OEM's way of constructing machines is changing rapidly. I give a lot of credit to Elon Musk for this. You've got Elon Musk obviously coming in with Tesla so fast and really finding a way to platform everything with the technology. So the OEMs are trying to figure out how to do that. And the hardest part for them is a giant cultural switch to software teams embedded at the component level, so that when this pump is put in a machine, the software for that pump is written there together. If that pump needs to be upgraded, the software is written with the team upgrading that pump right now. And if you're still operating under the old mindset, it becomes, hey, we put a new pump in, now let's go put a IT help desk ticket in and wait 2 months for the software to be updated. So I think that's what's really changing for the OEMs right now, is whether they're trying to emulate Elon Musk, or the market's changing as the auto industry is. On the dealer side, and this affects both sides, but it really affects the dealer with the way our margin structures are is the interest rates are huge. So when you have a supply chain crisis, increased cost of machines, obviously increased cost of labor, increased cost of parts, but we don't see the price on rental, for example, going up as fast as the machines increase in price. That creates a strain compounded then by interest rates. And so I think inventory control it's always been a critical piece of the business. Your inventory as a dealer can make or break you, but it becomes a whole lot more serious when interest rates are where they are right now.
Do you think that sort of links us into things like tariffs and some of the issues with the supply chain that the OEMs are having? One of the things that I've seen in this market this year is the OEMs have been really challenged by some of the tariffs and sourcing of machinery and having to change suppliers. And obviously, one of the key challenges for all of them really has been, right, if we're using X supplier, we now need to switch suppliers, or we need to pay an increased amount for X amount as well. One of the key challenges for them all is how do we pass that cost on to the customer, or do we pass that cost on to the customer? So do you think that you're going to see a lot of OEMs raising prices to counteract a lot of this tariff work? Or
it's been interesting. I've seen the smaller the OEM, the faster they've increased pricing to tariffs, the bigger the OEM, the slower. And I think you're seeing right now a lot of OEMs, the biggest OEMs, really flex their muscle and take market share by not raising prices. So it's an interesting time in the market from that perspective, because product support, parts sales for the OEM is a big piece of their pie. And I think the OEMs are beginning to really understand the parts consumption on the machines. And so by taking share, they know they're guaranteeing future revenues. And then some of the OEMs that don't have as much market share, I think they're more forced to increase pricing on machines right away. So I think that's an interesting divergence that we're starting to see.
It's interesting listening to you as well, because I think what we've seen, like you've just said, is the smaller OEMs are trying to get more equipment out the door, but they're putting the price a bit up, whereas the bigger OEMs, they're really squeezing them hard, because what they're saying is we're not going to change our programs, we're going to stand firm on it, but they're all kind of waiting for each other to sort of topple and make the first move. And I think when one of them makes the move, they'll all make the move. But the market is leaning towards the dealer side at the moment in terms of the ability for dealers to make profit, because loads of OEMs are trying to get machines out the door. They're competing heavily with each other. Sometimes some OEMs are actually competing with themselves within their own dealer network. So for me, what do you think is going to be the tipping point? Do you think we'll see one of the big OEMs make that change?
Well, that's hard to say, because I would have thought Cat Deere and Komatsu would have, considering everyone I think beneath them already has, but we haven't seen them do it yet. And we've seen, in my opinion, Cat take a tremendous amount of market share with being sensitive to pricing. And I think that, my hat's off to Caterpillar. I think they're playing the long ball game to grab the parts and service consumption business, which will create all kinds of downstream effects. So they're playing a little bit longer game. I think it's almost going to take Caterpillar taking their foot off the gas when it comes to how much share do they want, and then when do they want to raise their prices to alleviate the tariff costs that they have. That would be my gut feel, as I think until you see Cat raise their prices, I think we've got some real divergence of prices going on.
No, 100%. And I think for a lot of dealerships right now, it's kind of like make hay while the sun shines. We talk a lot about this, but private equity's probably got the biggest role in dealerships it's probably ever had. What do you think the end goal for a lot of these private equity firms is? Because it looks like they're all trying to get some of these big conglomerates to jump on board and purchase some of their businesses, create bigger groups. What do you think the end game is for a lot of these private equity firms?
Well, I think the private equity game is always to grow and consolidate. They're in this to grow something large, and they need to keep turning it, every so many years to keep it going. I would say I wasn't in the business at this time, but as a student of the business, it reminds me of the late 80s, early 90s, as we had a lot of private equity enter into dealerships and then exit.
Yeah.
So you had private equity that jumped in heavily in the late 80s, early 90s. Again, we just had a large inflationary movement. We had a robust market, and then we saw them exit. We saw a lot of families that sold their dealerships to private equity, buying back for pennies on the dollar. So I think also it's very tough for private equity when they were evaluating dealerships off of what was going on in the dealership network. And it wasn't so much the margins the dealers were making, it was how fast we could turn product. So for us, it's really how fast can we turn the widgets? If we can turn the widgets really quickly, our balance sheets look pristine, and we've turned an asset sometimes up to 6 times in a year, and never held it for more than 2 months if we held it at all on our books. Now the cycle's changed, and we've got dealers that are full of inventory. And so when they're full of inventory and they're back down to 2 turns a year, but now market hasn't really changed. It's the dealers are holding a lot more. They're back to, I would say they're a little bit more overloaded than normal, but the dealers aren't turning these widgets as fast. And so I don't know that it looks as attractive to private equity right now as it did a few years ago. However, at the same time, there was a time for private equity to hop in. It's probably now because the multiples will look very different after what's gone on in 22, 23, and 24.
Totally. And I think the market lends itself quite well at the minute to private equity because of the fact that the big conglomerate and the big rental houses are looking to consolidate and are looking to buy businesses, and the right businesses. What do you think's the most important thing for a private equity business to do in terms of coming into the market? What makes a really attractive proposition for one of these big rental houses in terms of buying a business, in your opinion?
I think there's a key distinction to make there. The rental game is different than sometimes the distribution game. I think distribution somewhat plays in rental, but it's very hard to be a good distributor and a good rental company at the same time. And so the rental companies are wanting to buy rental companies. And so many times what I see these private equity guys doing is they're buying a rental company and saying, hey, we're going to have the discipline to make it into a great dealer. They're really kind of two different subsects. For me, my rental equipment and my rental fleet follows all the standard rental company type measures, but it's one piece of my organization. And the discipline from rental is great, but the discipline from rental also involves that customer doesn't get to buy that machine at the end of 6 months. In the dealer world, we have rent to rent, we have RPO, we have parts, we have service, we have sales. That product support looks very different in a rental company than it does in a dealer. When a rental company has a giant work order with a machine, usually it's coming to us. They're usually not doing that work. And so there's really a difference with, that's where it's really tough. How do you they want that rental company mentality because they're watching the rental companies, but they're buying dealers.
Exactly. And how do you create a rental platform when you're buying a dealership is the big one. And how do you start off with a rental platform and build a dealer? I think those are some of the key questions, aren't they?
Yes. And it's just a challenge. They're a little bit two different worlds. So it becomes a challenge to take a rental company and turn them into a dealer. It's probably a little bit easier to buy a dealer and have it get started in a rental. It's just there's some cross-contamination you run a risk of with how do you rent well and sell well. And how do you provide the same level of service for the things you're selling, but kind of provide more of that rental level of service and product support when someone's renting. And I know people would say they're the same, but there is some differences to it when your whole focus is renting that widget, putting that widget out. It's not as relational with the customer who expects you to service everything the same way that you do for the machines he buys, and you wants the same kind of cost per hour advantage that he gets when he purchases versus when he rents.
No, 100%. And one of the key things from what we're seeing on our side, it seems like we're going to get to a point where obviously a lot of this private equity side of things, buying and selling, it will switch back and the OEMs will come back to the market and they will be able to start growing again because it's been a really tough couple of years for them in terms of tariffs and all sorts of different reasons. I'm looking at probably Q2 maybe next year, Q2, Q3, where you're going to see a lot of the OEMs really start hitting some really solid numbers again. What do you think in terms of those sorts of timescales? When do you think we're going to see the OEMs have the advantage, so to speak, again? Because it really is very well lined up for the dealers right now compared to the OEMs, even though it's tough for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think the OEMs that got the machinery off their dealers' books will turn the fastest. So we've watched CAT go through a in my opinion, from reading their financials, it sounds like, they started very quickly at the end of 23, getting very focused on how do we get our dealers' inventory down, because the inventory goes from the OEM to the dealer to the customer. So the log jam is in distribution right now. So, while the OEM's margins are down, the dealers' margins are down far more. So the dealers are the log jam right now because of when they purchase products, how much product they've got. So really the OEMs are the most disciplined and understand that throughput, that what really matters is when does the machine transfer ownership to the end user. That's how they unlock this cycle. And so I think you saw Cat start the end of 23. I think you saw Komatsu start about a quarter later. I think Deere was right there in the mix with both of them. And so I think as you cascade down and size the dealers and size the OEMs, those unlocks are just starting. So I don't think Q2 of 26 is a bad way to look at it. I also think some of this infrastructure build out that's going on right now will start to suck up a lot of this excess inventory that right now is sitting at the dealers.
No, perfect. I just want to bring it back to you for a second, because like we said at the start, you've had one of the most impressive careers that I've come across in construction equipment with everything that you've done. I want to understand from you sort of some of the most effective traits that you think you've been able to establish and sort of showcase to everybody. What do you think it takes to be the best leader possible for a dealership, for an OEM? What do you think are the major things you need to have to be successful?
I think being honest and sometimes having to say unkind truths is one. Just not being afraid to say what's really going on, and sometimes lose some of the political speak that sometimes we try to be too kind and aren't realistic about what the problem is. I think adaptability is a huge one. Having leaders and looking for leaders that are adaptable is one of the most critical things. When I interview people, my favorite question to ask, and my team here laughs about it, my team at Komatsu laughed about it, is, the only interview question I care about is tell me a story where you tasted salt water and tell me how you got through it. And by that, I kind of tell me about a challenge you had where you didn't know, you're given an assignment, you didn't know what to do, and you had to figure it out. I really don't care if they won and got it figured out. It was a great success. I really don't care if they failed at it. I just want to understand, how did they think through it? What did they do? And how did they try to adapt to this situation they were put in? And it's funny when you ask people that. I've talked to high level people that their story about the time they had to taste salt water is one of those you're like, really? That was the toughest thing you've ever faced. And then there's other people where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm on the edge of my seat and I want to talk to you for 45 minutes about this because it sounds like you were in a really tough situation. And so it's funny because a lot of people will pivot to an answer that had a good outcome. And sometimes the example is so terrible that you're just like, really? So it kind of gives me an insight to what worked or didn't work. And it also shows you willing to be vulnerable and say, man, I blew it, but this was my thesis. This is how I went about doing it. This is how I figured out how to solve that problem. And so it really lets you see their thinking and their adaptability. And the last one is, I would just say, being personable with people. People are people. How do you communicate with people? How do you encourage someone to share the good and the bad with you? Because that's what it takes to really succeed, is you got to have a full picture of you.
Totally. And I think relationships are everything in this market. It's one of the most unique markets, I think, that's out there for construction equipment, because everybody loves it. Everybody's done it since they were very young, and relationships are everything. It's one of the most archaic markets in that way, to be honest with you. One of the things I was going to ask you as well, just on that point, is talk to me about a time when you've had a significant setback and what you did to overcome it. So I'm just going to ask you the same question you just said.
I mean, obviously COVID 2020 was a really crazy time. In the middle of that scenario, had been leading Komatsu Southwest. Komatsu had asked me to take over all these different stores, going from 4 branches to 34 branches, about 1,000 employees. Southwest was doing well. The other groups were not. And so it was a huge lift to figure out, how do we solve the problem? I mean, at the same time, literally at the same time, my wife had just been diagnosed with cancer. She's fine now, but we were dealing with, my wife's got cancer. We're stuck in COVID, and I'm living in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and need to figure out how to get to New York City and Salt Lake and New Jersey and PA. It's about 13 states we were in. And so that was probably the most salt water I've ever tasted. How do you figure out how to navigate your way through that? And the beauty of actually what happened with COVID was I could spend so much one-on-one before I could get all the structures in place to figure out, hey, where did we have excess people, excess inventory? Had a great team that helped me. It wasn't all me. I was very blessed that we had spent a lot of time developing second and third level bench strength that I could deploy all over the US. Of course, everybody had to move in the middle of COVID, so that was tough. But I think in a weird way, COVID forced just perfect calendar execution for everyone, instead of everybody coming in your office and kind of delaying you for a time. It was perfect when you could go meeting to meeting. So I mean, I think those are some days of starting at 4:30 in the morning, because it's 6:30 or 7 on the East Coast, and just being able to get one-on-one with people before the day got started, and do the same at the end of the day for the folks on the West Coast. And so I'd say that was probably my biggest challenge. And a close second has probably been what's going on with interest rates the last 2 years. It's another saltwater moment where you're trying to figure out, okay, how do we hit our debt goals? How do we hit the balance sheet? How do we keep the business at the level of profitability that we had enjoyed during COVID, just from turning the assets so quickly, not because, we were raising prices in crazy fashions. But so one's kind of more of a personal plus huge change in the nation, and a huge change with what would happen with supply chains, to now kind of the second act of that. Now we've got all this gear, and how do we get it turned? How do we make sure that we're handling our shareholders' money correctly, and really moving that gear out and maintaining profitability?
Perfect. And listening to that, that's an pretty incredible amount to deal with. So it's testament to you that you managed to get through all that and do some of the amazing things you've done, and pretty inspiring as well, to be honest. Really impressive. And ask a couple of questions, really. I'm talking more directly about Ascendum Machinery, looking at the next generation and what we're going to do. How do you plan to make sure that you've got the right amount of technicians, right amount of salespeople? What's the plan in terms of retention and sort of some of the challenges in terms of talent as well?
Well, what we started in our third year here at Ascendum for this is we started a technician apprentice program. We've been recruiting, but we started a whole technician apprentice program. And so we're running technicians through, preferably right out of high school, or from a technical college, or somebody with limited work experience somewhere else, and saying, okay, you're this level of technician. Let's into this group and this cohort. We'll invest in you. We'll train you up. We'll help you to be successful, because obviously it helps us. And so I think with technician recruiting, that's been a huge piece. I think on the sales side, recruiting great salesmen. If you look in the industry, the number of great sales reps that are retiring, and it's all happening at the same time. You got a lot of contractors turning hands over, right? You've got a lot of contractors where the owners of that group are pretty wanting to sell their business. You've got this mix of customers that everyone's going to have to pay attention to, that are going to transition their business to another generation or to someone else. At the same time, you've got the sales reps that had those relationships with those owners, probably about to retire at the same time their contractor does. And so that's always something that you've got to figure out. All right, how do we bring the next generation of sales reps in? It takes some time to season and train. In my experience, a sales rep takes 5 years, and there's a really big ramp up period, but they take about 5 years to really get to get the experience underneath them, and see the results from their relationships. And at the same time, there's probably a period of time, about 30 years into their career, where you see the business they're doing with the people they have the best relationships just continues to skyrocket. But sometimes that drive to go beat the bushes and find every new small contractor isn't quite there. And so working through that divide of how do you take the most experienced folks, bring someone young in underneath them, and have them work together so that they can get the benefit of the younger guy going and turning over every stone and going after maybe the customers are just coming into the business and starting to grow, so that you get that growth with them as they grow, while you have your more experienced sales reps staying with the customers that they've had these great relationships with for a long time.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things that I think I'd pick out from your approach and Ascendum's wider approach is you're getting some really good young talent through the technician scheme. You're getting some good young sales talent, because it is a market that is full of a lot of people who've done it for a very long time. you know, the talent is drying up a little bit because people are retiring, people are making the choice to sort of make a change with the difficulties in the market, but getting that young talent through is so important. So it's such a good approach to have. Obviously, it's a changing industry. It always will be. What do you anticipate to be this most significant change coming for the industry? Because you've got things like electrification, software, telematic systems. What do you think is going to be the biggest shift for the next sort of 5-10 years in construction equipment in general?
I think you're going to see people sitting in the cab of a machine and able to ask the machine, tell what's wrong with you very soon.
Yeah, it's true.
And I think you're going to be able to hear things like, well, the hose on this boomer stick is 6 years old and the rubber on it's already expired. You're on borrowed time. When are you going to replace me? And at the same time, I think the contractor have the same issue where the machine's going to say, yep, he put too big a bucket on me and I broke XYZ because he put something on me he shouldn't have. So I think, you know, you're also going to run into the challenge of how does AI assist customers and how they do services, what services they do on their own. There's lots of that going on. So I think we're all going to be adjusting. And I don't think it's one of these where AI is going to change. I don't think a ton of people are going to lose jobs over AI. I think what's going to happen is that AI is going to create a lot of productivity gains. And so I can't wait for the day if you ever buy our Optimus robot and have the technician send the robot to go do the heavy lifting and the things that require more brute force work, and our technicians become more of like a superintendent on a job site, directing robots where to go. So I think there'll be a big change in the technician level too.
I think that's really interesting. It's almost like using AI as a support function instead of a whole around. It's not replacing the people element, which is so important to this market. It's making sure AI is a really good support tool and solving some of the major product support issues everybody has. That's really interesting. And I think to sort of close it out really, and I think this will be a really good question for you as well. What do you think the most valuable piece of advice you've ever been given in your career is?
Wow. I would give Jim Waitsman credit for this. You know, Jim Waitsman always said, if you'll give the customers what they want within reason, you can make a lot of money in this business.
That's a fantastic quote. Well, look, Grant, it's always a pleasure, buddy. Always a pleasure catching up. Really appreciate your time. Really appreciate you sharing so much with us. Always good to talk, mate.
Really, really appreciate you and all the years of advice and what you're hearing in the market and helping me find good people. So thank you.
No worries. Thank you, Grant. Speak to you soon. Cheers.
See ya. Bye-bye.
That was Conversations with CSG. I'm sure many professionals will relate and see value in the insights shared. Stay tuned for further insights from industry-leading professionals on our podcast, Conversations with CSG. Thanks for listening.